I'm Dr. Gordon Hamilton from Masters Academy and College. Tonight's talk is about climate change. This is the climate happening. Here we have winter. Here we have a city. This city is Calgary. Climate is what you expect. Weather is what happens. So we expect that July is going to be warmer than January, and that is generally what happens. That is climate. We can look throughout the world and we can see that there's different climate. So for example, here we have Mumbai, India, averaging about 29 degrees Celsius, and Iqaluit, Canada, significantly lower. Here's an example of climate change. What would happen if we just increased the climate everywhere by about 10 degrees Celsius? Well, that's an example of climate change. It's not a very interesting example. It's not a very realistic example. It doesn't happen. Climate change, it can be extremely dangerous. Let me take you through some examples. First of all, the Vikings in 984 occupied Greenland. Their colony grew to about 2,000 to 3,000 people. And then it collapsed. 1408 is the last vestiges of any information about the Vikings on Greenland. Here is a girl's dress. She died at about 10 years old from the Viking colony in Greenland. These might have been her parents' dresses. And this is the church where in 1408 the last couple got married. That's the last information we have from anyone on Greenland from the Vikings. Western civilization also ended up killing people because of climate change. There was a big cold snap. So between 1550 and about 1850, there was a big cold snap in Europe. And this ended up with dramatic consequences for witches in particular. In one town in Germany, we have in 1626, May 27th, we had a winter storm blow in. This winter storm scared the townspeople. They were scared of losing their wheat and their grape crops, and they turned on the witches. A 19-year-old by the name of Barbara Goebel, she was accused of being a witch on May 27th, day of the snowstorm, and she was tried and executed as a witch. So were 900 other people. She was 19 years old. Let's look at the ocean, and one of the big climate changes that happen pretty regularly. And this is going warmer and cooler again. So this happens periodically in the Pacific. Now, it doesn't happen super regularly. Here's a graph of those warming and coolings. You can see that about 10 years ago, see right there, 10 years ago, there was a big warming. Now, what effect does this periodic warming and cooling have on the civilizations in our past? The Mayan civilization was heavily affected by this warming of the Pacific. There were 3 bad warmings during this civilization that eventually destroyed them. It destroyed them through drought. So this is an example of a Mayan city. There were many of these, maybe 10 million people in this civilization. The Moche civilization lasted between 100 and 750 AD, and some very interesting archaeological evidence has come out of excavations around this site. Here we see an example that might hint that there's something a little bit violent about this culture, the Moche. And indeed, whenever we dig down into the earth, we find 42 young men, and they've been murdered. And the interesting thing here is that this murder, if you look at the ground content here, you will see that this happened in times of floods. So there was actually a correlation with the Moche. That warming of the Pacific didn't produce droughts, it produced flooding. And it was very damaging flooding. It probably damaged the agricultural infrastructure of the Moche civilization significantly. And so we have repeated massacres of young men, probably as an appeasement to the Moche gods, to try to bring back a more pleasant, less torrential downpours to get rid of this warm Pacific. In more recent times, 1877 to 1878, there were droughts that hit at the same time of the Pacific warming. 500,000 people died in Brazil, 500,000 in Indonesia, 5 million in India, and 10 million in China. So there's the hypothesis that this Pacific warming creates droughts in many parts of the world with severe, severe consequences for many people. Here's some British in India. So the question is, how do we avoid the fate of these civilizations that collapse because of climate change? So first of all, kind of obvious, I think we need to learn more about possibilities of climate change. And we can use those to improve our computer climate models. That will allow us to make better predictions in the future. And then, with those better predictions, we are going to be able to adjust how we live, if we need to. So the first place to start collecting climate is your handy thermometer. So grab one of those, take it outside, and maybe start calling up your friends in different countries to do the same. So here we go. We've got five countries here that we've 5 different friends that we've called, and we can see, your friend at the South Pole, he reports pretty cold temperatures, and Mumbai, India, your friend there, reports pretty warm. Now we could take all of those temperatures and we could average them. And on top of that's only going to get the land surface of Earth. So on top of that, we probably want to take the people from boats that are going around the seas, and we want to grab them and get them to also contribute with their thermometer warmings. If we do that, we can average everything together, and we get an average temperature from the Earth. And that is about 14.2, 14.3 degrees Celsius. And that's not too interesting. But what we could do is we could take that back through time, and we could look at how that temperature has changed over time. So here's the last 25 years. You've called your friends over those 25 years, or if you weren't alive, then your parents probably did. And you can average those temperatures from all around the world, and you see some interesting things. For example, you find out that 10 years ago, we had our warmest year ever. There you go. It was about 14.5 degrees Celsius. You can also, with today's technology, get a snapshot from space of Earth. And we can use infrared, like you've probably seen in some movies. You can use infrared to take a snapshot of Earth, and that's going to be able to tell you something very useful about temperature as well. So here's a snapshot of Earth from NASA using infrared technology. Some of the things that you notice immediately. Where are the hot spots? Where are you losing the most heat? You're losing the most heat, for example, in the desert. Here's the Sahara Desert. Another thing you might notice is that the oceans, you're losing a lot of heat there as well. Interestingly, the clouds are actually a blanket. So these are equatorial clouds, and they're actually acting as a blanket. The ground underneath them, you can imagine, is actually warmer than these high-altitude clouds. So these clouds are actually protecting the Earth from losing heat.